Hello photography friends, Michael from Fujifilm here again. June 30th, 2020. Big day for all owners of Fujifilm GFX cameras because there is a massive release of firmware updates for the 50S, 50R and for the GFX 100 cameras. So, of course, they fix a lot of minor bugs and do feature enhancements and stuff, and I'm not here to go into every single one of those things. I'm going to touch the main ones, the ones you might be most interested in. Now, of course, you should remember that the GFX 100 has a 102 megapixel sensor, but it's completely different than the 52 megapixel sensor that is in the 50S and the 50R models, and therefore not all the features were able to update on all the cameras. Some are specific to the GFX 100 only. So let's talk about the GFX 100 first. It is a really capable cinema camera for video capture. It'll do up to cinema 4K internally, 10-bit in Fujilog and Rec 709 film simulations, and it has internal stabilization as well. Well, with the new firmware, you will now be able to record ProRes RAW files onto an Atomos Ninja V recorder. So you won't be able to record it internally because the files are massive and they're huge and they need the Atomos processing to turn them into ProRes RAW. But now with this firmware update, you'll be able to get the ability of ProRes RAW, which gives you a lot more flexibility in post-production and how you manage the color and how you manage the dynamic range of the video signal. Now, speaking of RAW files, but going back to still photography for a moment, the GFX 100 can capture both 14-bit and real 16-bit RAW files in camera, and you could have it in uncompressed or compressed. Well, now the new firmware gives you a third file saving option, which is lossless compressed. So as you can see, you have three different file sizes now to choose from with RAW photography. Also cinema related is the GFX 100 firmware will now allow you to control things like the ISO and the shutter speed, f-stop, stuff like that. When you have the camera mounted on a gimbal, say, or on a drone, and with the compatible vendors that we're working with, the full details would be on our website, you'll now be able to make those exposure adjustments from the gimbal or drone device instead of having to do it only on the camera. Okay? So now, a couple things now that made it to all the cameras are the addition of some new film simulations. So we are a film company. We're very proud of the film simulations that we've been using on all of our cameras. Well, all the cameras now in the GFX system will get something that we announced about a year ago called the negative classic film simulation. So before we had a negative high and a negative standard. The negative standard is one that I recommend to wedding photographers. It's a very delicate film simulation and it's very helpful with skin tone, so I really like that one. Well, the negative classic is a little bit higher in contrast and it's a different range of color reproduction. A lot of people that have been using it on some of our X series cameras really like it. Okay, it's a bit of a throwback to some days gone by. Also, there's been something known as the Eterna film simulation that's been around now for a couple of years, which is based on our motion picture film stock, okay, our color negative movie stock. And Eterna was designed to be extremely faithfully accurate, all right, because that's what cinematographers for the most part really want. We want to give them a good, honest color palette with beautiful tonal reproduction. And that's what the Eterna film sim does. Well, now, with the GFX 100, it's going to get a new one called Eterna Bleach Bypass. Now, Eterna Bleach Bypass is a real particular beast because it is very low in saturation, but at the same time, it's really high in contrast. Those two things usually don't go together, so it's a really unique look. But The 50S and the 50R will now get the regular Eterna film simulation, which before they didn't have. So if you are shooting video on the 50S and the 50R, I strongly encourage you to try the Eterna film simulation because you'll really like it. In the GFX 100, we got something new now called the Color Chrome Blue Effects setting. So the Color Chrome Blue Effects setting basically enhances blues. It leaves all the other colors alone, but it's basically like putting a polarizer on the front of your lens, and there's a weak and there's a strong setting, and it can be a lot of fun to use. On the 50S and the 50R, there's also the addition of something new that we've had in other cameras called the smooth skin effect. It's subtle, but it does help remove some of the rougher textures that you can get with some people when you're shooting portraiture. So again, that's new to the 50S and the 50R. So let's talk about focus. Again, remember what I said, very different sensors. So the GFX 100 has a sensor that has phase detect pixels that cover corner to corner on the sensor, okay? The 50S and the 50R are contrast detect only, so the enhancements on autofocus are different. However, across the board, they have made the eye detection, the face detection and eye detection for all three of those cameras much better than it was before, and this is especially helpful when you're shooting portraits with groups, when you're shooting multiple heads in the shot. It's going to work much, much better, much more accurately. Now, in the GFX 100, because of the phase detect, they've now lowered the sensitivity of the autofocus down to -5 EV. So our new X-T4 camera that came out in the spring goes down to -6 EV, and this is -5 EV on a large format camera, and that's a huge improvement. So that's something you really should be all excited about, those of you that have the GFX 100. Now, with the 50S and the 50R, what they did enhance was not so much the speed of the focus, but the accuracy in low light. Because the contrast detect is not super great in low light, but they've been able to change the processing and make it much, much better in locking on now when you're in dark situations, okay? Something else that I like with focusing is focus bracketing. So this goes to all three of the cameras, the 50S, 50R, and the GFX 100, is we've added a new autofocus bracketing function, which will enable you now to set the near point and the far point that you want to capture. And the camera will automatically determine how many frames it needs to shoot. So this is obviously going to be based on the lens that you have, exactly the distance, and more importantly, what f-stop you choose on that lens. So if you have a really shallow f-stop, the camera may say it needs to do several hundred frames, 300, 400 frames. And when you hit the shutter button, it will simply execute that automatically. Now, if you stop down, F11, F16 or something like that, obviously you have more depth of field, and the camera will figure that out and say, okay, I don't need to shoot as many shots, I'm going to shoot less. Now, of course, you still have to take all those frames and take them into your computer in post-production and do the actual merge, but the cameras will automatically create all the images you need to create a really good focus stack. Another handy addition to all three cameras is compatibility of star ratings with third-party software. So when you shoot a bunch of pictures and you're playing back on the camera and you go through them and you go, well, I've got some good ones, I've got some not good ones, ooh, that one I really like. And you can apply star ratings on the camera, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, now when you take those files and put them on your computer and open them in most of the big name third-party editing softwares, those star ratings will be reflected on your computer. So the star ratings now carry through. Alright, so I've been slinging this GFX 50R around with this lens attached, and those of you with good eyes may have noticed something about it. And you might ask me, hey Michael, is that the newly announced GF 30mm f3.5 RWR lens on there? Yes, as a matter of fact it is. I thought you'd like to see what it looks like and the comparison of the size compared to the body. It's really nice and lightweight. It tips the scales at just a hair over 1 pound. So the focus is really fast, and again, it's weather sealed. It goes on sale at the end of July for a list price of about $1,700. Really, really like it. Okay, thanks for joining me. See you next time.